What if the man who was supposed to love her never wanted her at all, but the man she had never met was the one fate had chosen for her? A biting wind cut across the dusty main street of Cheyenne as Ruby Hathaway stepped off the stagecoach, clutching her small valise like a lifeline. The cold sliced through her thin coat, but it was nothing compared to the sharp sting of the stares she felt from every direction. Young ranch hands elbowed each other and grinned at her generous figure. Older matrons lifted their chins, whispering behind gloved hands as they eyed her worn bonnet and travel-stained dress. Ruby felt each glance like a pinprick, but she kept her back straight. She had survived worse than whispers. She had survived loneliness. 5 long days on a jolting stagecoach had brought her here from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. 5 days of dust choking her lungs, of cold nights, of fear sitting heavy in her stomach. But she did it because she believed she was heading toward a new life. A life with Harold Beckett, the rancher who had written to her asking for a wife. Direct, distant, but promising stability. She stepped down onto Cheyenne soil with trembling hands and tired bones, but also with a flicker of hope. This was the frontier. Anything could happen here. But Harold Beckett was nowhere to be found. Ruby stood at the stage station for nearly an hour, her valise at her feet, her heart sinking deeper with each passing minute. People came and went. Wagons rattled by. But no one approached her. Finally, the station master, Seth, a wiry man with kind eyes, walked over Miss You, waiting on someone, he asked. "Yes, sir," Ruby said, trying to steady her voice. "Harold Beckett. He was supposed to meet me." Seth frowned and scratched his jaw. "Don't know him. But I can ask around." Ruby nodded, though worry pressed at her ribs. What if Harold had seen her from afar and changed his mind? What if he had decided she wasn't what he wanted? A big woman, plain-faced, not delicate like the girls men tripped over back east. As the sun dipped lower, the truth settled in her chest like a stone. She had been abandoned. Seth pointed her toward Wilmer's boarding house for the night. Ruby thanked him, gathered her skirts, and walked down the dusty street alone. Each step felt heavier. Each stare burned deeper. And the shame. Oh, the shame gnawed at her like a hungry thing. Wilmer, the large woman who ran the boarding house, met Ruby at the door. She didn't laugh. She didn't judge. She simply looked Ruby up and down with a softness in her eyes. "Evening, dear. Need a room." Ruby swallowed the knot rising in her throat. "Yes. My fiancé didn't meet me." Wilmer sighed. "I've seen that happen more than I'd like." Those words nearly broke Ruby. But she held her chin high and paid for the room with what little money she had left. Upstairs in the small, tidy bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed and let silent tears slide down her cheeks. By morning, exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. Still, she forced herself to go out and search for Harold, determined to find answers. But every place she asked, the smithy, the mercantile, the saloon, returned the same blank confusion. Until finally a clerk at the feed store snapped his fingers in recognition. "Oh, Harold Beckett. Came by once or twice. Haven't seen him in months. Heard he was selling his spread. Might be long gone by now." Ruby's heart dropped. Gone. Could be halfway to Colorado. Behind her, a few ranch hands snickered. "Guess he took one look at her and ran," one whispered. Ruby's cheeks burned hot, but she did not cry. Not here. Not in front of them. She walked out with as much dignity as she could gather. Though her chest ached and her throat tightened, she felt small, alone, foolish. But fate was moving in the shadows. Just a few steps away, a tall, broad-shouldered man with deep brown eyes had overheard the entire exchange. His name was Sawyer Mallister, a mountain guide and trapper who rarely came down from his cabin in the high peaks. He watched Ruby's trembling shoulders as she disappeared around the corner. Her pain struck him harder than he expected. Maybe because he knew what it was like to be judged before a man even opened his mouth. Maybe because there was something proud and gentle about her that didn't deserve ridicule. something that stirred something old and unspoken inside him. Sawyer didn't approach her, not yet. But the thought of her alone in this cold, hard town wouldn't leave him. Later, Dr. Weston, a local doctor who knew Sawyer from his visits into the mountains, mentioned Ruby's situation. "She's at Wilmer's boarding house." The doctor said, "Poor woman. Left high and dry. Folks have been cruel." Sawyer's jaw tightened. "Does she have anyone?" "No, she's all alone." That was enough. Sawyer wasn't a man who meddled, but he also wasn't a man who turned his back on those who were hurting. He walked straight to Wilmer's boarding house, dust swirling around his boots, shoulders squared with quiet purpose. Inside, Wilmer recognized him with a curious raise of her brow. "You looking for Ruby?" she asked. Sawyer nodded. "Heard she might need help." Wilmer studied him a moment before softening. "She's proud, Mr. Mallister, but she's hurting something fierce." Sawyer stepped into the parlor and saw Ruby sitting on a worn sofa, face in her hands, shoulders shaking as she tried to hold back tears. The sight tightened something deep in his chest. He cleared his throat gently. "Ma'am," Ruby jolted upright, wiping her cheeks, embarrassed to be seen crying. "Yes," she whispered. Sawyer held his hat respectfully. "Name's Sawyer Mallister. I heard what happened. Thought maybe I could help." Ruby blinked in confusion. You want to help me?" "Yes, ma'am," he said softly. "No one should be left alone out here." For the first time since she arrived in Cheyenne, Ruby felt something she thought she'd lost. Hope. Ruby stared at Sawyer Mallister, unsure whether to trust the sudden warmth she felt rising in her chest. He stood in the parlor doorway like a wall of quiet strength, hat in hand, eyes steady and honest. He wasn't polished like the men back east, or sharp-tongued like the ranch hands in town. He looked carved from the mountains themselves. Broad shoulders, thick beard, weathered clothes, and a presence that made the room feel suddenly safer. Still, fear clung to her ribs. "Why would you help me?" she asked quietly. Sawyer shifted his hat between his calloused hands. "Because you're alone. Because this place can be cruel. And because I know what it feels like to have nobody." Ruby's throat tightened. She didn't want pity, but something in Sawyer's voice wasn't pity at all. It was understanding. "I'm not looking for a wife," he added, almost awkwardly. "I ain't trying to replace the man who left you. But I've got a cabin in the mountains. It's safe, warm and quiet. You could stay there for a bit, just until you figure out where to go next." Her heart thudded. A cabin? With a stranger? It was frightening. But what were her choices? She had a handful of coins left, no job, and no family to write to. Staying in Cheyenne meant more stares, more whispers, and more painful reminders that Harold Beckett had abandoned her. Still, she lifted her chin. "May I think about it until morning?" Sawyer nodded. "I'll be at the livery at sunrise. If you come, I'll take you with me. If you don't, I'll ride out." He tipped his hat and left, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. That night, Ruby barely slept. Her mind spun through every possible fear. What if Sawyer meant to harm her? What if she couldn't handle life in the mountains? What if she made the wrong choice again? But beneath all that fear was something else. A small ember of belief that maybe, just maybe, not everyone wanted to hurt her. At dawn, she packed her valise with trembling hands. By the time she reached the livery stable, Sawyer was tightening the straps on a mule. He looked up as she approached, chest rising in a silent breath of relief. "You sure?" he asked. Ruby nodded. "I'm ready." Their journey began with slow steps, the horses carrying them out of Cheyenne and toward the open plains. The morning sun painted the land gold. Sagebrush rolled like waves. The wind smelled of pine the closer they climbed toward the mountains. Sawyer rode slightly ahead, glancing back every so often to check her pace. Ruby had only ridden a handful of times, and nerves made her grip the saddle tighter. Still, she pushed forward, determined not to appear helpless. Around midday, they stopped near a small creek. Ruby helped gather kindling and tried to busy herself, but she couldn't shake the weight of their silence. Sawyer wasn't rude, just quiet, like a man who didn't waste words. She finally asked, "Why do you live so far from town?" Sawyer looked up from the fire he was building. "Town life never suited me. Too many people trying to measure each other. Up in the mountains, a person is just a person. No gossip, no sneers. Ruby swallowed hard, understanding too well what he meant. They camped beneath a canopy of stars that night. The sky stretched endlessly above them, and Ruby felt small in a way that wasn't painful, just humbling. She fell asleep to the crackle of fire and the soft murmur of the wind. By the next afternoon, Sawyer's cabin came into view. Nestled between tall pines, with smoke rising softly from the chimney, it looked like something out of a story. Simple, sturdy, warm. "This is home," Sawyer said. He helped her down from her horse, and for the first time in days, Ruby felt her fear loosen. Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and wood smoke. Sawyer showed her the small spare room. "You can stay here as long as you need," he said. Ruby touched the smooth wooden frame of the bed. "Thank you," Sawyer weeks passed. Ruby learned to chop firewood without losing her balance, carry heavy buckets from the creek, and mend clothes with steady hands. Frontier life was hard, but it demanded a strength she discovered she had. Sawyer watched her quietly, never staring, never judging, always seeming almost surprised at her determination. One morning, he set a rifle in her hands. "You need to know how to protect yourself." "Everybody does out here." Her first shot startled her so badly she yelped. Sawyer chuckled. "Not unkindly. You'll get it," he said. And she did. Evenings were the hardest. The world outside turned quiet, and the cabin felt smaller, warmer, almost intimate. They shared stories. Ruby about her life in Portsmouth, Sawyer about the lonely years he'd spent in the mountains. They grew closer without meaning to, without trying, without even knowing it was happening. But the world outside hadn't forgotten Ruby. One night, a trapper named Clem knocked on the cabin door. Sawyer welcomed him with a cautious nod. Clem's gaze drifted to Ruby. "Didn't expect to see a woman up here. Folks in Cheyenne are still talking about that mail-order bride who got left behind." Ruby stiffened. Heat crawled up her throat. Clem noticed the way Sawyer's jaw tightened. Sawyer stepped closer to her. "Her name is Ruby," he said, voice low and firm, "and this is my home. You'll treat her with respect." Clem lifted his hands. Didn't mean no harm, but the damage lingered in Ruby's chest long after the man left the next morning. She sat outside on the cabin steps, staring at the trees. Sawyer joined her quietly. "You ain't what they say," he murmured. "Not one bit." Ruby blinked fast, her throat tight. "Then what am I?" Sawyer looked at her then, fully, deeply, like seeing into her heart. Stronger than they'll ever know, Ruby didn't speak. She didn't need to. Because for the first time in her life, she believed it. And for the first time in his life, Sawyer Mallister realized he didn't want to live alone anymore. Wait, before we move on, what do you think about the story so far? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'm really curious to know. What if the love she had searched for her whole life was already standing beside her, and she was the last one to realize it? Winter arrived in the mountains with a sharp bite. Snow piled high against the cabin walls, and icy winds rattled the windows. Ruby had grown stronger, steadier, and more confident over the months, but nothing prepared her for the sudden fear that struck one bitter night. Sawyer collapsed in the snow outside while chopping wood. Ruby heard the thud and rushed out, her heart pounding. She found him on his knees, breath shallow, face burning with fever. Panic slammed into her chest. "Sawyer!" She struggled to drag him inside, her arms trembling with effort, but she refused to give up. She got him onto the bed, his skin hot as fire, his breath uneven. The fever took hold fast. He mumbled things she couldn't understand, tossing under the blankets. Ruby soaked cloths in cold water, pressed them to his forehead, whispered to him, prayed for him. She barely slept for 2 days. On the third morning, Sawyer's breathing worsened. Ruby knew she couldn't wait any longer. She saddled the horse herself, hands shaking, fear clawing at her, and rode through freezing wind to find Dr. Weston in Cheyenne. The doctor rode back with her, battling the storm as Ruby's teeth chattered with worry. When they reached the cabin, Sawyer was barely conscious. The doctor tended to him, his expression grave. "The fever is strong," he said. "Keep him warm. Keep him drinking. The rest is up to his strength." Ruby didn't leave Sawyer's side. She fed him broth, held his hand, hummed softly when he shook with chills. There were moments she thought she'd lose him, moments when his breath hitched and his eyes didn't recognize her. But Ruby refused to let go. "You're not leaving me?" she whispered against his hand. "Not after everything." Then one early morning Sawyer blinked awake. His eyes were clearer, his voice rough. "You stayed," he whispered. Ruby broke into tears of relief. "Of course I stayed. Where else would I be?" He reached up, touching her cheek with weak fingers. His touch was gentle, aching, full of something he hadn't dared to say. "Thank you," he breathed, "for fighting for me." Ruby pressed her hand over his. "I'd fight for you every time." Sawyer's recovery was slow but steady. Ruby helped him walk again, helped him eat stronger meals, helped him regain his strength. She did it without complaint, without hesitation. And Sawyer watched her with something new in his eyes, something warm, something deep, something like love. But Ruby's heart wasn't settled. Not yet. Because only weeks later a peddler passed by the cabin with a letter. The handwriting made Ruby's stomach twist. Harold Beckett, the man who had abandoned her. Her hands shook as she read his words. He apologized. He regretted everything. He wanted her back. He offered a new life in Denver, even sent a train ticket. Ruby walked outside, snow crunching beneath her boots. She stared at the mountains, her new home, and felt something shift inside her. Sawyer appeared at the doorway, pale but standing. "You, thinking of going?" he asked quietly. Ruby hesitated. "He says he wants me. That he's sorry. That he can give me a good life." Sawyer looked down at his hands. "A man should keep his word. But maybe he can give you more than I can. A city. A fresh start. Comfort." His voice cracked on that last word. Ruby stepped closer. "And what do you think I want?" Sawyer swallowed hard. "You deserve a man who can give you everything." Ruby felt tears burn her eyes. "Everything isn't parlors or shops or fancy dresses, Sawyer. Everything is kindness, safety, a place to belong." Quote, "He met her eyes then, searching, 'You belong in Denver, Ruby. Not here with a man who doesn't know how to be. All the things you should have." Ruby reached up and cupped his jaw gently. "You are everything I should have." Sawyer froze. Breath caught in his throat. "Ruby." "Say it," she whispered. "If you don't want me here, tell me now. Otherwise." He grabbed her hands, holding them tight. "I don't want you to go," he said, voice deep, raw, full of truth. "I want you here, with me. I want you as my wife, if you'd have me. I can't promise much, but I swear I'll protect you. I'll cherish you. I'll never let anyone hurt you again." Ruby's heart swelled with so much emotion she thought it might burst. "Yes," she breathed. "Yes, Sawyer, I'll marry you." Their vows were simple, spoken beneath a stand of pines, with spring air warming the earth around them. Later, Dr. Weston made it official with a small ceremony, using his worn Bible. Ruby Hathaway became Ruby Mallister, wife of the mountain man who saw her not as a body to mock, but as the woman he always wanted. Months later, when they journeyed into Cheyenne to file their marriage papers, people stared again, but for different reasons. Ruby walked with her head high, confidence in every step. She stood beside Sawyer, who never once stepped away from her side. Even the ranch hand who once mocked her found the courage to apologize. "I was wrong," he said, looking down. Ruby nodded gently. "Thank you." As they left town, hand in hand, a stagecoach arrived. Harold Beckett stepped off, eyes wide as he saw Ruby. She looked radiant, strong, steady, loved Ruby. He breathed, "You look different." She nodded politely. "I'm married now, Harold." And Happy Harold lowered his gaze in shame. "I'm sorry for everything." "I know," she said softly, "and I forgive you. But my life is up there now." She turned to Sawyer, who helped her onto the wagon, his hand warm around hers. They rode back to the mountains, the place where she had been remade by love, patience, and a man who saw her worth from the very beginning. Ruby Mallister's laughter soon filled the cabin. Her strength and Sawyer's quiet devotion built a life that was simple, rough and full of heart. She had come west looking for a husband. She found a home. She found a purpose. And she found a man who saw her, truly saw her, body, heart, and soul.